So now that we've finished the feast days, I have 2 feasts that I want to go over with you that aren't the initial feasts that God gave to all of Israel. And these feasts are just for the Jews. And the Jews were the ones who designated these feasts. One is Purim and one is Hanukkah. And tonight we're going to talk about Purim. And that is found in the Book of Esther. And I'm going to go through these chapters with an overview so you can understand what the Feast of Purim is. So the Jews, which is the southern kingdom, which is the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and half the tribe of Levi. Those were the only people who were Jews, the southern kingdom. When they went into captivity, they were held captive by Babylon. But then, as time went on, the Persians took over. And the capital was in Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were in charge. But now Ahasuerus is the king. He has the capital, it's called Persia now. He has the capital in a city called Shushan. And he has this big party. And in those days, the women and the men were kind of separate. And so the ones in the women's house where the queen was, they had a big banquet too. Wow. Well, hey, the king and all the men, they're just getting bombed, drinking. And he's showing off everything. Oh, here's my wealth, here's my ring, here's my crown, blah, blah, blah. Here's my palace. When he gets good and drunk, he does something he shouldn't do. He said, I want to show you the queen. So he sent, his treasure, because she was beautiful. He wanted to show her off, and it was inappropriate. But he was drunk. And so he sent a message to the queen, and she said no.
Good.
Well, it ended up being not so good for her. So what happened was, all the princes said, hey, when everybody finds out the queen said no, all the wives in the whole kingdom are going to start saying no to their husbands. They started packing. So they wanted the king to make a rule that all women had to respect their husbands. And then this queen, whose name was Vashti, she was never to see the king again. It wasn't like she got murdered or anything, but she would never be allowed to see him again, and she wasn't the queen anymore. So the king decides, we're going to have a beauty contest. And his princes say, go into all the provinces, send out a message, and we want to find the fairest virgins in the whole kingdom. And then you can decide which one you want for your queen. Well, the king's like, hey, that sounds good. Yeah. By this time, the Jews had kind of intermingled, and people didn't exactly know who was a Jew or all that. They sweep up Esther. And Esther gets taken into the court of the women. And Esther was raised by her uncle Mordecai. And because her parents had died. And so he took her on and raised her as his own child. So he told her, when she got taken to the court, he said, do not reveal your identity to anyone. Now, I think that was God giving him that message, because it ended up being very important. So they bring all the girls in, and they're purifying them for a year. They're probably eating certain things and perfume and oils, all this stuff, so they can be all beautiful. But this is what's very interesting. Chapter 2:13. Thus came every maiden unto the king, and whatsoever she desired was given her, to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king. In the evening she went in. I want you to think about this timing. And in the morning, the next day, she returned. So his way of testing was sleeping with the women, these virgins. Every one of them was a virgin.
But not after he slept with them, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So the testing went during the night.
Yeah.
Oh.
So Esther was taken unto the king Ahasuerus into the house of the royal. And the king loved Esther above all women.
Wow.
And she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
Mm.
Now her uncle Mordecai sat in the king's gate. And one time, when he was sitting there, he heard these two officers of the king plotting to kill him.
Oh.
So he went and told Esther. Esther tells somebody to tell the king and mentions the name that it's Mordecai. I want you to remember that fact because that plays big in the rest of this story. Okay, so what happens next in chapter 3 is Haman. He's one of the princes. And he decides that he is going to elevate Haman to be above all the princes. He's like the prime minister. He is second in command. And
But he's not well liked, is he?
well, he was by the king. We're going to see he wasn't too popular after all. Okay. So anyway, Haman gets promoted. And then he is like so full of himself that when he goes by the king's gate, everybody bows down to him except Mordecai. Mordecai's not going to bow to any person because he believes in God. He is not bowing to this man. And it really gets under his skin. He gets pissed off. Some of the other princes who were near the gate asked Mordecai, "Why aren't you bowing?" And he said that it was because he was a Jew. When Haman hears that, he gets enraged and he says, "I'm just going to kill all the Jews." Now this is where the word pur comes into Purim. What he does is he goes to his astrologers and magicians and has them to cast lots to figure out, he wants it to be the right exact day. So he's doing this by evil means. Even though casting lots, the high priest of God did that, but that was with God in control. He's going to these evil men to do this. And they pick a date, and it's either, not sure, it's a month called Adar, but that could be February or March the 13th. Haman goes to the king and says, "Look, we got to get rid of these people. They are rebellious and they're just vermin. We got to get rid of them." Anti-Semitism, right? It's been going on for a long time. It started in Egypt. And they were killing all the male babies. Right? And then Hitler. And today, there is still anti-Semitism. So he goes to the king, and the king doesn't know who the Jews are. I mean, he's forgotten about all that. He feels like, well, I put this guy in charge. He knows. So he goes, we got to make a decree that all the Jews should be killed on this February the 13th. So he sends out the decree to all the provinces. And so the Jews start panicking. Hey. So Mordecai is so upset that he puts sackcloth on and mourning and crying because he was so upset that his people were going to be destroyed. But why they put on the sackcloth and ashes is because this is expressing on the outside what they're feeling on the inside. Well, something happens. Number one, the Jews start fasting. They're like, hey, we're in trouble. We got to turn to the Lord. We're in trouble here. But something else happens. The king woke up in the middle of the night. He just couldn't sleep. You ever have that happen? Get insomnia?
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about that on the way over here.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I'll turn on the radio and just fall asleep, listen to the radio. Gloria says she can listen to the TV and just kind of fall asleep. Well, that's the trouble he was having. So he said, bring the Chronicles. That was the diary of the king. And remember what had been written in there about Mordecai? And he found written that Mordecai had told about the king's keepers of the door who sought to lay hands on king. And the king said, what honor and dignity has been done for this? And they said, nothing. Nothing. The king says, who's in the palace? And they go, well, Haman is. They go, well, bring him in. And the king says, Haman, what should we do to somebody who is really favored by the king? Well, of course, he's thinking it's him. Because he got promoted to be second in command. So this is what Haman says. Let the royal apparel be brought, which the king wears, and put it on him. And the horse that the king rides, and put him on that horse, and the king's crown on his head. So he thinks he's going to get all this, and he's so excited. And let the apparel and the horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes. That's him. So the king said, so be it. And I want you to do every single thing that you said, and I want you to do this to Mordecai. So you talk about eating crow. He had to take Mordecai through the streets and say, the king has honored this man. He's wearing the king's crown. He's on the king's horse, wearing the king's clothes. So Haman is just enraged. He had told his family and his friends, as long as this Mordecai is not bowing down to me, I just can't enjoy all these things that I have. So his wife suggests, well, why don't you build a gallows? And he was going to build a gallows 50 cubits high. That's 75 feet high. Build a gallows. Is this like overdoing it or what?
Oh, yeah.
So Esther sees Mordecai out there, wailing and all this, and she doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't know about the decree. So she sends one of the eunuchs out to him and says, what's going on? And she sent some clothes. He says, I won't put them on. And then he told the eunuch about the king's decree and gave a copy of it to him. Said, give this to Esther and tell her she's going to have to go to the king and plead for us. She says to Mordecai, you know that if I go before him and he hasn't asked me, I could die. You couldn't just walk in and talk to the king. He had a golden scepter. And if you came before him and he didn't want you there, he would not put out a scepter. And men would come and take you away and you'd be gone. But if you put out his golden scepter, you would live. And that means I accept your presence here. So she sent a message to Mordecai. She was afraid. She said, I'm going to die. What Mordecai says to her is, look, you can do this, and you think that you're going to die, but you're going to die anyway because you're a Jew. And you're going to die either way. And if you don't do this, Mordecai's got faith. God will raise up somebody else to save his people. Mm-hmm. So what she did was she went to Mordecai and says, look, tell everyone, all the Jews, to fast for 3 days. No water and no food for me to go before the king. And she said, if I perish, I perish. She was willing to give her life. And what Mordecai said to her, and this is kind of a famous saying, he said, and who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Meaning, God's in control. That's why she won the beauty contest. That's why she was beautiful. That's why the king picked her to be the queen. The providence of God, he's thinking about his people. So finally, she's willing to do that. And she goes before the king. And he puts out his scepter. And he says, what is your petition? I will give you up to half the kingdom. Just think how much he loved her. He would share the kingdom equally with her. And you know what she said? Well, I would like for you and Haman to come to a banquet today that I prepared for you. So the king thinks, hey, this is great. Gets Haman, and Haman is all like, oh, wow, only me and the king? I'm so important. He was so full of himself. Yes. So they go to the banquet, and he, asks her again at the banquet, what is your petition? I'll give you up to half the kingdom. She says, my petition is that you come to another banquet tomorrow. Another banquet. So when they come to the next banquet, okay, so he asked her again, and this is chapter 7. And Esther said, the queen, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition. She said, please spare my life. and my people. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to be annihilated. But if we had been sold to be slaves, I wouldn't have said anything. But we're being sold to be murdered. And King Ahasuerus answered and said to Esther, who is he? Who is this who's doing this? And where is he that presumes in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid. He was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went to the palace garden. In the meantime, Haman's running over to Esther. He's saying, hey, she's a good woman. And in those days, when they ate, they sat on like little couches. They ate down low. And he went and laid on her couch and was pleading with her. And when the king returned, then the king said, will you force the queen also? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's head. And in those days, when they covered someone's head, that meant they were going to be hanged. And one of the eunuchs said before the king, behold also the gallows 75 feet high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stands in Haman's estate. The gallows. Then the king said, hang him. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king pacified. But I want to tell you a couple of verses. One is Numbers 32:23. And you know what that says? Be sure your sin will find you out. That is exactly what happened to him. And another one is Psalm 7:16, and it says, his mischief shall return upon his own head, and his violent dealing shall come down upon the crown of his head. I mean, you try to do stuff, you just might have to pay for it here and now. Yeah. She reveals to the king that Mordecai is her father, so to speak, her uncle, but stood in as her father. He gives Mordecai Haman's ring and promotes him to second in command.
I love that.
Yeah. It's a great story. And think about it. That's exactly what happened to Joseph.
Yeah.
He was in prison.
That's right.
But he kept finding favor. Even he found favor in prison. He was running the place. Mm-hmm. And then when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he finally ends up second in command. Here are second in command to heathen kings. And Esther, a Jewess, is married to a heathen king. It's amazing how God gets in there and works things out. So in chapter 8, the king says to Mordecai, you can write a new law. He just leaves it in his hands. You can use my stationery. You can use my ring. Because once you do that, no one can reverse it. So the king could not reverse the law that he made about the Jews being killed. That's the law of the Persians. Can't do it. But he said, you can make another law. So he did. And he let Mordecai do it. So Mordecai made a law that the Jews could defend themselves on that day. And they were so excited. They were so happy that they were feasting. Because think about it. The lot that was tossed ended up being the lot for their victory. And that's why it's called the Feast of Purim. So the Jews were so happy. And what they ended up doing was annihilating all the people who were sent out to kill them. And you know, this is what happened with Haman. Pride cometh before a fall. Right? And when you think about it, he was so full of himself and so proud and thought he was such a Mr. Big Shot. That's what brought him down. And that's the original sin. That's the original sin of Satan, was pride, thinking that he could be God. I'm so beautiful. He was beautiful. That's why he was named Lucifer, light. He was beautiful. And in Ezekiel, it says, he was made perfect in every way, but sin was found in him. I want to get to the end of this and read about Mordecai. And he sent letters unto the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with the words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, according to Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters, because she was a queen, she could confirm it, of Purim, and it was written in the book. And King Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and his might, and a declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of the brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, speaking peace. So the purpose of this book is to show God's providence, working with people. Esther thought she was going to die, and she ended up saving all the Jews, including her own life. So you may be in problems, and you may think there's no way out. There is a way out. God has a way out. He always does. And sometimes these problems may seem so impossible, just like her thinking, I could die. But she said, if I perish, I perish. Maybe you were brought to the kingdom for this hour, and maybe you're in the problem you're in for this hour. So that's going to be my message for tonight.